understander of being. And there is only an understander of being on the basis of anxiety, basis of affective mood. And it sounds like you want to do philosophy without moods.
Wait, on this first question, I think that it's that Lacan, for example, says that what is ruling the relationship to the real is anxiety too. It's the same theory. You know, anxiety is precisely for him the measure of the real, something like that.
Right.
Translation, Heideggerian translation, anxiety is the immanent experience of the being is in the Dasein, something like that. And so there is something in the understanding of being, the experience of being, which is not of intellectual or formalized dimension. I think this is across your three questions.
Yeah.
And yes, but you know, the question, it's a question of what sort of desire or affect is engaged in philosophical determination, something like that. And it's also present in your second question, because finally it's also the question of what is the relationship of philosophy to practical knowledge, to engagement, and so on. So I can reduce finally your three questions to one. What is the relationship on the side of philosophy, but also on the side of psychoanalysis, to that sort of affect or that sort of subjective engagement, which is by necessity present in that sort of activity, which is the philosophical activity. And your process is a process of intellectualism against me, a temptation of intellectualism.
Well, I mean, Heidegger thought the great revolution, in a way, was the introduction of anxiety as a philosophy of anxiety. Taking it up from Kierkegaard, you could say that anxiety belongs to philosophy. There is no true philosophy that is as a localization of a void between truth and being without anxiety. And I'm wondering, how do you ontologize anxiety?
My answer is that I agree that there is always, in the question of the localization of the void, there is always something like an affect.
Okay.
Because all what is purely of representative nature cannot go to the separation between truth and the real.
Right.
So the experience of the void, of the abyss between truth and so on. So the experience of the fact that we are simultaneously inside the becoming of being and separate of the truth of this of this movement is certainly, by the way, of an affect. I agree with you on this point. And that is one more question which is in common with psychoanalysis.
Right, okay, yeah.
And finally, I agree with you. The word anxiety is a good name for that sort of common point of philosophy and psychoanalysis. There is a great meditation of Lacan concerning Kierkegaard too. And in the seminar concerning anxiety, there is also the assertion that the question of the real, in the sense of localization of the void, of the lack, finally, is also the question of anxiety. I agree with all that, but in any case, philosophy in its proper order and psychoanalysis in time is the process to go beyond anxiety and not to stay in anxiety. And why? Because anxiety is the measure of the disposition of the void, but is not by itself a thinking of this disposition. Because a thinking is always something which can support the experience of transmission. Or anxiety cannot be transmitted as such.
Right.
Anxiety cannot be transmitted as such. Though, so, anxiety or any affect, which is an affect concerning the localization of the void, is certainly a necessity. There is no possibility of individual engagement in philosophy or in any strong form of vital experience without that sort of affect. But we must say that affect is a condition of thinking, but thinking is not reducible to affect.
Right.
But there is always a moment where affect can be moderate in some sense.
Right.
It is there also in the teaching of Lacan. The analyst, Lacan says it's very important that the analyst must measure, must moderate anxiety. It's a task of the analyst during the cure. Anxiety is fundamental, but we have to moderate anxiety to go to go to something which is beyond anxiety, under the condition of anxiety. And so, I return, this was your last question, I return to the question of the matheme. The understanding of the matheme cannot be purely of intellectual nature, purely bad Platonism, something like that. No, matheme is the ideal of transmission. Is the ideal of a complete transmission. That is finally the ideal of thinking itself. Because without the experience of transmission, we cannot know if thinking is thinking. Maybe thinking is not a new name for the affect itself. A name for anxiety, a name for experience.
But you want to say there are a remainderless transmission, and that's what I find deeply problematic. The remainderlessness of the transmission seems to be losing the as Heidegger says, what calls thinking, was heißt denken, not what thinking is.
No,
but
I don't think. I begin by the fact that thinking is always a point where experience and concept are indiscernible. It's my definition of thinking. So if you transmit something in thinking, you transmit by necessity not only a pure form, but by necessity also the experience which is in this form, which is linked with this form. And it is why, for example, in psychoanalysis, but in philosophy too, transmission cannot be without transference. Transference on the body of the master in philosophy and transference on the psychoanalyst in psychoanalysis. And why there is this transference? Because in this transference we have also the part of the affect in the experience of localization of the void. Okay. And this is why we have to defend the necessity of a master in philosophy. we have to defend the necessity of a master against the anarchic critique of philosophy as finally the reign of the master and so on. But the master is only, the matim is the name for the ideal of complete transmission, and the master is the name for the transferential part of transmission, that is the part of transmission which concerns the affect itself.
Right.
And it's inevitable.
So you say it's a Lacanian mapping.
In pure formula, you know, mathematics is absolutely a question of desire. The difficulty of mathematics is the desire of mathematics, not mathematics itself, which are very simple. The point of the mathematical transmission is that not that mathematics are difficult, but that mathematics are too simple. Only letters, nothing behind. It's impossible to understand this nothing behind. You search something behind the letters of pure mathematics, and we find nothing, and so we don't understand anything. But it is why the only solution is also to constitute a desire. To constitute a desire is also naturally a question of concrete condition of transmission, and concrete conditions of transmission are subjective conditions.
Right. Okay.
Absolutely.
You have lots of other questions.
Go ahead.
Well, are you sure since there are regular seminar participants here?
Go ahead.
All right. I have first a question and then a point of contestation, but I prefer to ask the question first, have you respond, and see where we go from there. Now, by the way, before I ask the question, what you said about mathematics with letters, there's this wonderful one-liner of Lacan's in the 23rd seminar on Le Symptôme, where he says, sometimes the truth is stupid, which would be interesting to pair with your citation of Spinoza from the end of your presentation. But when Lacan speaks of anti-philosophy, he does so only on two occasions, in 1975 in Peut-être Vincennes, and in 1980 in the short text Monsieur A. Now, between those two explicit references to anti-philosophy, in his 25th seminar, in a session from 1977, very surprisingly he says, what Freud does is philosophy, what I do following Freud is philosophy, my Borromean knots, with which he was very tied up at the time, those two are also philosophy. And I'm wondering, based on how you discuss the common border in the final third of your presentation, how you interpret this identification of Freudian psychoanalysis and his own endeavors, Lacan's, directly with philosophy at a time right in between those two references to anti-philosophy. Do you, for instance, favor, say, François Regnault's proposal that when Lacan says anti-philosophy, it's a specific sort of philosophy, and Regnault identifies it with Deleuze and Guattari. Do you favor that sort of reading, or do you think this testifies to Lacan struggling at the common border and oscillating as a result of these overlaps you're tracing?
J'ai presque compris, mais je vérifie quand même.
Entre les énoncés sur l'antiphilosophie, il a identifié la philosophie dans ce qu'il faisait aux anthropologues. Est-ce que toi, tu serais d'accord avec François Regnault qui disait, c'est plus quoi, tu te souviens,